So, as the Wellington boot of inevitability comes crashing down on the innocent snail of time, we must say so long and farewell to 2017. It's been something of a tumultuous year, full of disasters and political upheaval, but at least we can now boot it out the door. On the gaming side of things, there have been a fair share of scandals and nuisances, but through all of the mess, some quite decent games have emerged, so it's time to do the proper thing and order them into categories before we limp into 2018. As usual, I'm limiting my awards to games I've either written about or recorded at some point, regardless of release date. Of course, written about can include the smallest of articles, but hey, I make the rules so I can bend them. We've got a few new categories emerging this year, but let's start with an old hat, shall we? The Tee Up My Nose Award for Scariest Game. Runner-up, Thumper. I don't think Thumper has ever been marketed as a horror game. Wikipedia has it as a rhythm violence game, which sounds silly until you play it. You quickly realise that you're not so much listening to Thumper's music as being beaten over the head with it. It's deep, rumbling and aggressive. Above all, it's sinister. That's helped along by the fluid metallic quality to everything. Clinical yet unsavoury. Things just sort of rise up out of the netherworld, curling and flexing like metal tentacles. If hell doesn't turn out to be full of fire, then Thumper's aesthetic would be my second guess. Winner. Resident Evil 7. There were two big boys of horror this year, Resident Evil 7 and Outlast 2. Both share the same problem, really. They start off very strong, but quickly fall apart once you realise they've shown you their entire hand. Outlast 2 starts by scaring you with its creepy villagers and making you hide in logs. By the end, you're still hiding in logs, waiting for the villager of the moment to stop muttering to himself and sod off. That's when you're not getting your balls impaled, that is. That happens a lot. Resident Evil 7 stays strong for longer, but it keeps chucking its weird goopy enemies at you, as though 3 of them at once is supposed to make them more interesting. They kill you a lot until you realise you just kind of wave your hands in the air to stop their attacks. The level near the end, set on the ship, just proves how irritating they are. But this award isn't a measure of how decent the game is, it's a measure of how scary it is. And the Baker family scared the life out of me. I knew it was going to be that way from the moment Jack Baker punched me in the face and I woke up strapped to a dinner table. That scene really stuck with me. Just a whole family of nutters giggling as they force feed you God knows what. Then you go through each of the family in turn and have them pop out right when you don't want them to. The king of all that is Jack Baker, the man who refuses to die. The first quarter or so of the game is spent in his company and he will not leave you alone. When all you've got is a pistol and a tiny pocket knife, the knowledge that Jack Baker could be behind any door is terrifying. The best thing a horror game can do is make you scared even when nothing is near, and Resident Evil 7 did that. Until Jack turned into a giant slug thing, that is, but I'll talk about that. The Folded Corner Award for Best Writing. Runner-up, Night in the Woods. I really like Mae Borowski. She's a kid that's had things beyond her control repeatedly dumped on top of her, and now she's kind of drifting. She went to college and it didn't work out. Now she's returned home and it's not home anymore. Regardless of the dialogue choices you make for her, she always sounds like a real person. So do her friends. You feel like another member of the gang just hanging out, dealing with the real world crumbling around them at every turn. It takes a decent storyteller to make characters dealing with personal problems believable. Mae is just like any of us. So only a cat, I guess. Winner. Oxenfree. The worst thing about Oxenfree is having to play it. Sounds odd, but the best part of Oxenfree is the characters talking to each other. I'd say it would work as a book, but that would be an insult to the decent voice actors. Maybe an audiobook? Anyway, the joy of Oxenfree is how you make these characters interact with each other. It's a branching choice kind of thing, rather like an interactive fiction game. The protagonist, Alex, has her own personality, but there's just enough room to inject some of yourself in there too. So much so that when I got to the end and found I hadn't really made friends with Jonas, I had to stop and think back over everything I'd said to him. Had I been rude to him? Had I ignored him? I told him to calm down once, was that it? Oh god, I'm a monster! In most games of this type, it's usually obvious what line's going to elicit what response. And that's why I love Oxenfree, because it's not obvious, it's natural. Humans generally don't talk in grand, sweeping words. We hide behind small talk. We talk about the weather, what we did today, what we're playing. It's how we say things and how much of ourselves we put into the conversations that matters. Oxenfree captures that well, putting a group of scared teens together and making them depend on each other. Making them get to know each other, making them love or hate each other. There's 1 part light-hearted drama to 2 parts B-movie nightmare. On top of the good chemistry, you got the fact that Edward's Island is slowly breaking down the people on it. Otherwise stable characters begin to shout at each other and you feel drawn into the mess. I haven't felt so desperate to keep a set of characters alive in a long time. That's a sign of good writing, if anything is. The Head Nod Award for Best Soundtrack. Runner-up, Deadbolt. You know when a great song comes on the radio and you find yourself mouthing along to the words without even thinking about it? Well, by the time I finished Deadbolt, I was clicking my fingers along to the music. It's a very smooth soundtrack, which complements the suave feel of the game. The undead are rendered as mobsters, ranging from thuggish zombies to the more stylish vampires and skeletons. So a soundtrack that switches from violent to classy, while keeping the same smooth feel, is undoubtedly a good one. Winner! Night in the Woods. There weren't many games this year that had mind-blowing soundtracks. There was an odd song here and there that I liked, but nothing that really leapt out at me. So I was struggling to find a game to fit into this slot. But then as I was looking back through the list of games I've played this year, I remembered the band practice parts of Night in the Woods. They were fun to play, even though I was terrible at them, but the real joy was in what they represented. It was the gang back together, united by a burning desire to get out of the deadbeat town they were born in. The first song, Die Anywhere Else, captured that perfectly. All of the songs are great to listen to by themselves, even without reading the lyrics underneath. You often can't read them actually, as you're too busy mashing buttons. Which brings me to the real reason this is number one, the covers. I don't usually care for covers or remixes, but the excellent covers of Die Anywhere Else and Pumpkinhead Boy out there elevate Night in the Woods to the number one spot. The I don't get it award for Best Art Piece. Runner-up, Little Nightmares. In terms of gameplay, there's a lot lacking when it comes to Little Nightmares. You run and hide from dense enemies as you move right. The interesting part of Little Nightmares is the world. It's proof that art doesn't have to be all sunflowers and grass fields. Sometimes it can be a urinal that someone's pissed on. Sometimes it can be disgusting. Little Nightmares is. It's a world of bloodied meat, dirty corners and obese, gluttonous characters. It's a horror game that lets its world speak for itself. It's gross, unsettling, and while it looks like ours, it feels like a truly other world. Did I mention it's gross? Winner, Hyper Light Drifter. Okay, cards on the table, I am biased. I have a love of games that have a pixel-based art style. Hyper Light Drifter is, perhaps, the finest example of that art style. The crowning moment comes near the start when your protagonist walks to the top of a hill and the camera pulls back to show a city behind it. It's a beautiful moment that's contrasted well with the darker elements of the game, like the pixel-based bad acid trip that the game opens with, full of black monsters that appear to be corroding our hero from the inside out. The protagonist is deathly ill, a decision that was meant to reflect the developer's own health, and his coughs cause the graphics to darken. Outside of those moments, Hyper Light Drifter is an extremely bright and colourful game that does a lot to differentiate its areas. Granted, there aren't very many of them, but each is wonderfully distinct and culminates in its own unique boss. When you're not slashing up bosses, you can retire to the main town and take in the sights. Hyper Light Drifter is a short one, but it's one full of intricate detail, bright colours, and a whole lot of my own blood being spilled. Special mention, Prey for Talos 1. The Lot of Paperwork Award for Best Action Game. Runner-up, Wolfenstein 2, The New Colossus. There's a lot wrong with Wolfenstein 2. It wants you to be badass but slaps your wrist when you do. It's built around stealth, but the easiest way to do things is just put a couple of thousand bullets in everyone, so on and so forth. That's not relevant here. What is relevant is how fun it is to mow down space Nazis with a shotgun in each hand. The guns look nice, sound nice, and feel nice. Given how hard it is to nail that last one, it makes Wolfenstein 2's gunplay all the more impressive. Winner, Deadbolt. Deadbolt is kind of an understated badass. The Reaper wears a shabby coat and a skull mask. At least I think it's a mask. He basically walked off the set of an action film and went home. He even spends his evenings in a big wingback chair. All in all, he seems like a pretty, possibly undead, regular guy. That is, until he goes about his job. He takes a message from the fireplace, don't ask, and goes out to murder the undead. That's where the true fun is. It's taken a few notes from Hotline Miami, but its action is a bit slower paced, a bit more thoughtful. The mad run and gun gameplay of Hotline Miami rarely works in Deadbolt. Usually you will clear a few vampires only for the bartender to casually blow your head into tiny fragments with a shotgun. You normally need a plan before you go in. So when you do have one, and it all works, it's bloody marvellous. Even when it fails, if you can think on your feet, then you have a chance of pulling it back. The sheer flow and mania of Deadbolt's combat makes it stand out for me. That and the simplicity of it. For the most part, you're just dealing with a handful of firearms and maybe a hammer or two. You get a few guns out the trunk of your car, but the ammo dwindles quickly. On some levels, you're basically throwing an entire kitchen at the undead. This all culminates in a final level that pours on the baddies. I lost count of the times I'd unload into someone only to be left with a hammer, burst through a door, bury it in someone's head, grab their gun and begin the rampage all over again. My god, it's addictive. The Beep Boop Award for Best Retro Game. Runner-up, Punch-Out. Rather ironically, Punch-Out kicked my ass. I managed to get all the way up to the Super Macho Man, then he launched his over-the-top clothesline attack and my head hit the ground, presumably after it was rapidly detached from my body. But time and time again I tried. I still go back to it after the internal swelling has gone down. The modernised Punch-Out on the Wii is an excellent sequel, but it's worth paying tribute to the game that kicked it all off. It's the perfect blend of timing and charm that no doubt sucked thousands of coins out of kids in the arcades. Now it just sucks some of my soul. Winner: King's Quest VI. I played all of the King's Quest games this year, including the modern version, and of all the games I think it was King's Quest VI that stuck with me the most. Mostly because it was the game where King's Quest stopped trying to play its fairy tale inspirations straight. Instead, it embraced the silliness and love of puns that started properly in King's Quest V. In short, King's Quest VI is where it found its own goofy identity. Sure, it was still mired in the moon logic that characterises the King's Quest games, and pretty much any adventure game of the age, meaning you have to hunt through the entire world for an easily missed object, but it didn't matter. That same world was the most important thing. And King's Quest VI took you from an Arabian town to a Minotaur's labyrinth, and then to a strange garden full of anthropomorphic fruit and veg. Then you meet some living chess pieces. It's weird as hell. And that's why I love it. I have a love of surreal games in all forms, and King's Quest VI pushes it to the extreme. When you're dealing with a genie that gets drunk on mints, who hides himself around the entire map, you know you're dealing with a special game. That and it's pretty damn funny because of it. I mean, you find a rotten tomato that shouts at you, only for you to shove the damn thing in your trousers. The "You Wanted Sugar, Right?" award for biggest disappointment. Runner-up: Yooka-Laylee. Truth be told, I'm not 100% sure why I backed Yooka-Laylee. My only real experience with the genre was a brief stint with Banjo and Kazooie back in the day. It was okay, but I don't remember it setting my world on fire. Perhaps I backed Yooka-Laylee because it was bright, colourful, and looked like good, silly fun. It was that, to a degree, but what they neglected to mention was the awkward camera, fairly by-the-numbers level design, and bloody annoying final boss. It's not a big offender, but Yooka-Laylee is clogged with too many little annoyances to keep it off this list. Winner: Condemned to Bloodshot. Maybe it's not right for me to rag on a game from 2008, but I can't help it. I hold up Condemned Criminal Origins as one of the best games I've ever played. It has a great combat engine and knows the right environments to stick you in, even if their super taser snaps the difficulty over its knee. It was Monolith at its height, as they also had the first Fear game out, bringing the creepy Japanese little girl to the world of video games. But it seems that Monolith has something of an issue when it comes to sequels. Fear 2 was nothing revolutionary, and Condemned 2 was far, far worse. The big selling point of Condemned for me is the combat, knocking out teeth with a bit of pipe and trying not to suffer the same. Condemned 2 Bloodshot somehow ignored all of that and focused much of the later half of the game on dull, gun-based combat, with guns that have all the weight and feel of a bloody spud gun. It's nonsensical to me and made much of the game a tired, boring slog. Shame really, as we dropped the relatively bland Ethan Thomas from the first game and replaced him with a more interesting one. And yet they also tried to really push the supernatural angle. I'm all for a bit of weird mystical nonsense, but you need to make it fit. The rest of Condemned is going for a sort of realistic feel. You use proper forensic skills, you're in a world full of the homeless, and it's just generally dark and grimy. Then you use your magical throat to shout a guy off a giant tower. That's the final boss fight. No, I'm not joking. It's the final decisive blow in an onslaught that begins about halfway through the game. It starts strong, with some good old-fashioned pipe-to-the-face action, then descends into supernatural nonsense and tedious gunfights. Now, for the big one. The Golden Teapot Award for Best Game. Runner-up: Night in the Woods. Night in the Woods has appeared in multiple categories this year for a good reason. A somewhat branching adventure game based around a group of friends who want out of their town, Night in the Woods wonderfully transitions from light comedy to creeping horror. Remember how I said supernatural stuff needed to fit in? Night in the Woods manages it. Your main character, May, witnesses a kidnapping halfway through the game. It sets you up to find a killer, only to realise the true evil seems to be lurking in May's own head. It pulls it off because it's well written, with each of the main characters being a delight to talk to. I had a definite fondness for Greg, who wears a sweet leather jacket, because of his excitable nature that he uses to mask his own feelings. There's a lot in Night in the Woods when you dig under the surface, and the charming graphics, solid writing, and sinister atmosphere in the later half make you want to do just that. Winner! Drumroll sound effect, please. I've gone around here somewhere. There we go. The winner is Hollow Knight. When I finished Hollow Knight and put the controller down, I thought to myself, that's my game of the year. Usually I have to puzzle over these things, but not this year. Hollow Knight has just absolutely won my heart. For one thing, it's pretty damn beautiful. Visiting Hallownest is like visiting an old castle. It lies in ruins, but with remnants of what once was. A great battle has swept through it, leaving only fragments behind. Fragments of buildings, fragments of people, fragments of memories. It sets the tone of the game very well. It's sort of a downtrodden tone, yet here and there you find little pockets of hope, which seem at times personified by our little hero Bug. World building aside, it also plays remarkably well too. I've been banging on about simplicity in gaming for a while now, and Hollow Knight embraces that concept. There are a lot of skills for moving about and a few for attacking, but for the most part you're just going to be bouncing about and slashing things with your nail. I like it because it takes the focus off the game's mechanics and puts it back on the player. It comes down to timing and precision. Button mashing isn't really going to cut it when you're dealing with a small bug stuffed inside a giant suit of armour. It also has some of the smoothest platforming I've seen outside of games like Super Meat Boy. Our little knight jumps, slashes and glides perfectly. Platforming deaths nearly always felt like my fault. What's more, Hollow Knight introduced me to a genre I've never really been interested in before, Metroidvania. I played a bit of the old Castlevania games and one of the newer ones that went completely out of my head as soon as I finished it. Never played Metroid though. I never really gotten the idea of exploring and re-exploring areas. Hollow Knight changed that for me. Every time I came to a barrier I made a mental note knowing I'd be able to get through it one day. It changed how I look at things. I'd try, die and save it for later. Every new skill caused new exciting areas of the map to open up. It was that thrill of discovery that kept me glued to Hollow Knight, along with the great boss fights. I wanted to poke into every corner and Hollow Knight let me try it, drip feeding me tools along the way. So even if you discount the great graphics, haunting soundtrack and excellent gameplay, Hollow Knight wins by introducing me to something new and making me love it. So that's 2017 over and done with. I hope you've all filled yourself with turkey over the Christmas period and your drink of choice over the new year. With any luck, you won't be too hungover when you watch this. As for me, I'm going to make myself a nice, strong pot of tea and get ready for 2018. See you there.